Today we are going to talk about simplicity and focus and creating a website that offers just enough choice. And part of the reason that I chose this topic is that in my day-to-day life as a strategist at One North, a lot of what I talk to clients about is the amount of information that they're presenting on their sites. I talk to them about, what information they want to display or need to display to convey the right messages and to hit the right goals. And so as this comes up time and time again, I thought it'd be a good thing for us to dive a little bit deeper into, thinking about how we're presenting choices, thinking about the different ways that people get around the site, interact with the site, and how easy or challenging we might be making that by presenting different sets of options. So, our agenda for today. Why don't you just tell me what you'd like to talk about? That, of course, is not my real agenda. You'd never set up a presentation that way. You'd never leave anyone sort of just hanging there like that at the start of a presentation, although clearly I did. And the reason is you want to set expectations. You want somebody to have an understanding of where you want your discussion to go. And that's actually sort of one of the first problems that I want to talk about in terms of presenting options, presenting choices on the web, is not giving enough direction, not making it clear where you want somebody to go. The other end of the spectrum is when you have too many options. So those are some of the things we're going to look at. And I do have a real agenda. And it looks like this. So first we're going to talk about why I chose choice. I've talked about this briefly, but at a little more deeper level. Why is it that we want to talk about choice? We want to talk about then some science, and don't worry, it's not too scary, and there's no physics and there's no test. We'll look at some decisions in the wild, how you approach decisions in your everyday life. We'll look at decisions on the web, and then finally we'll talk about why this all matters. So first of all, why choice? All the things I could have chosen to talk about, why choice? So marketing came to me. They said they wanted me to do a webinar, and I thought of some great things I could talk about, because there's a lot of great things happening on the web, things that maybe would have been a little more popular, had more people salivating, wanting to learn about these things. Great things like responsive design, the readable web, single-page design, personalization, all sorts of great stuff happening. And I chose choice. Why would I choose choice? Well, choice is really the foundation of the web when you think about it, and as I see it, it's the foundation of all of those other things, all those hot topics. Personalization is a way that you can highlight the right choices for somebody. Responsive design requires you to make a lot of decisions around choices so that you've got an experience that scales well from a mobile device to a full-screen device by presenting the right options at each point. And really, choice is just the foundation of the web, right? So this is Yahoo. As long as we've been working with the web, we've been working with choices. So this is Yahoo in 1995. And when you went to yahoo.com in 1995, you essentially got a list of choices. Now we look at this today and we say, boy, that's kind of a cluttered mess. But really it was, very popular at the time, just to have just a list of a bunch of options. So, but now we'd say, obviously we wouldn't do that. But still, that is the foundation. Links, giving people options, is sort of where we've come from. We've come a long way. Maybe. Now when you go to Yahoo, there's still a whole lot of options, right? But it's gotten a little better. And there's more of a clear sense of priority. But still, there's no real direction given to me here. It's not immediately clear where you want me to focus or where you want me to start. So let's look at the other end of the spectrum. The other end is sort of the why don't you just tell me where you'd like to go idea, and that we see with Google. And that's okay. I mean, for Google that works because Google isn't trying to lead you in one direction. You're going to Google because you know where you want to go or you know what it is you're looking for. But that doesn't really work in the business context. So really what I want to talk about today is more of meeting in the middle. And the middle looks something like this. This is Twitter a couple years ago. And Twitter a couple years ago had a whole bunch of options, right? A whole bunch of different ways that I could get started interacting with the Twitter website. Today, we've got a very scaled back set of options. And it's the right options at the right time. And that's really the direction I want to try to get everyone to move, right? Rather than having those options just to have them, we've got the right options at the right time. So when I get to the Twitter homepage, this is all I need, because these are the right options for me at the right time. I can sign up, I can sign in. And now you might be saying, but wait, don't we like options? Don't we want to see all of those different things? Isn't it good to have a lot of choice? And to get that answer, we're going to look at some science, decision science specifically. So this is a book called The Paradox of Choice. It was one of my key inspirations for what I'm talking about today. And the paradox of choice sort of goes like this. Choice is great, but when we have too many options, we stress, we get confused, we overthink, and we're never happy with our final decision. And you can think about this in your own life. That's maybe some of the bigger decisions you've had to make in your life. You know, maybe buying a house. It's a stressful process, and you tend to overthink things. You really overanalyze things. Wears you out. And then when you finally do make your decision, you're always thinking back about some of those other little things that maybe you didn't get, right? So just by having choices, we're going to be less happy with our decision. It's not to say we don't need choice. Now, one of the great things that the book, The Paradox of Choice, brings about is the grocery store experiment. And this is talked about in pretty much everything that you'll read on decision science. And the grocery store experiment looks like this. There's a sample table set up at a grocery store that offered exotic jams. And we had two groups at two different times. Group A presented only 6 jams. Group B had 24 different varieties. Now, more people were attracted to, meaning more people went to the group that offered more jams, Group B. However, when it actually came to making a decision, to buying something, only 3% of participants made a purchase in Group B, but 30% of participants made a purchase in Group A. Now, what we take away from that is that by offering a more focused set of options, we made it easier for somebody to make a decision, which in turn led to more people making a decision, taking an action, in this case, making a purchase. And then we have more bad news for options. This is Hicks Law. Just let that soak in for a minute. We'll assume that you've solved it. Really what it means in a less science-y fashion is that the more options we have, the longer it takes to process all of those options. Okay, so now not only are we not going to be happy with our final decision, now is it harder to make a choice when you have a lot of options, but it also takes a lot of time. And I mean, I personally don't have a lot of time to think about which jam I want to purchase. Or on the web, what this means is that we're slowing people down when we give them too many options. You know, your site might perform great, the server response time might be awesome, but if you've got a lot of options, you might still give this impression of being slow to your end users, simply because you've presented a lot of options. It just makes it challenging to work with. So in other words, decisions are hard, but we do need choice. We can't get away with not having any choice. Without choice, we just feel trapped. Choice really gives us a good sense of freedom, right? And it also acts as a signal. This is a really good example of choice as a signal. There was a $279 bread maker that Williams-Sonoma released that they just couldn't sell. Then they came out with a $429 model, and sales of the $279 model took off just because there was now that comparison factor. So sometimes choice is really good at letting us know what we don't want. And that in turn drives up sales, in this case, of what we did want. And then sometimes we just like options, right? We do, but they have to be presented properly. Even if you have a lot of options, you don't necessarily need to just throw them at everyone. And we'll see this a little bit in our next section, which is where we'll talk about some decisions in the wild. I believe he chose the top fish. Those aren't really the decisions we're going to talk about. So, we make hundreds of decisions every day, from the very, very minor decisions to big decisions. And, a lot of us just have decision fatigue from that. We don't want to spend time making more decisions. I know that when I'm done at work at the end of the day and I've made a lot of decisions in the day and my wife asks me what we want to have for dinner, I break down and start crying. Happens every day. So some smart companies, though, have figured out ways that we can make decisions a little easier. And by making decisions easier, we'll see that a lot of these companies have actually had a lot of success. So let's look at some of those strategies. And the first strategy we're going to talk about is just the reduced option strategy, or the focus strategy. So let's say it's time for you to buy a new phone. Now, you might be considering an Android phone and an Apple phone, an iOS phone. Right now, we have 4,000 plus devices running Android, and a little over 7 on iOS. Now, you might look at that and say, oh, great, Android, lots of options. Apple, kind of missing out on certain parts of the market. And some people have criticized Apple for that. But when you look at actual satisfaction, you see that Apple has been leading the way in customer satisfaction for many years, probably as long as they've made phones. And it's because they've been able to focus on just a few key products. They've been really able to refine those products and been able to do a lot from a customer satisfaction, happiness standpoint. We see this in other areas as well. It's not just about high-end technology. We see this in everyone's favorite decision. What's for dinner? This is a restaurant called Raising Cane's. This is their entire menu. If you're not familiar with Raising Cane's, it is a restaurant that only sells chicken fingers. They have a 4 chicken fingers, 3 chicken fingers, 6 chicken fingers option, or chicken fingers on a sandwich. Not a very diverse menu, and again, you might think, boy, that's kind of a little limiting, not a lot of options, not great. But if we look at a very recent survey that was done, you see that they are leading the way in terms of customer satisfaction in the quick service restaurant industry. So just by focusing, both with Apple and with Raising Cane's, we'll see that you can really do a lot more for quality control and have some better outcomes. And that's all well and good for those businesses, but what if your business is built on options, right, or a diverse service offering? What do you do then? So some tactics to take there. First, we have the concealed options strategy. And you see this with Starbucks. Starbucks is a company that promotes that they have 87,000 plus espresso drink combinations. Now on their menu, they'll only show you about 30. And if you live somewhere where you happen to have a drive-through, you'll get even fewer. In fact, you only get a handful of options if you go through the drive-through. Partially, this is because you can just assume, some of your customers will understand that, a basic function of you being in business is that you offer something. And partially, it's that you can give them hints that you might have things, or you can have them ask. But you don't need to just tell them everything at once, right? That'd just be too much information. Instead, you kind of conceal it and let it come out in a more, as somebody asks about it, or, you can just leave, somebody will just assume that you do something. Similar, related, but not exactly the same, is the progressive decision approach. So Chipotle, everyone's favorite burrito, at least mine. Another company that offers wide array of combinations, but they don't just tell you all the different possible things that you could do. Instead, they break down your decision process to a few small decisions. In fact, you'll notice that they really don't even have like traditional menu items. Instead, they just list their ingredients, and you just make those few small decisions. So all the options are presented to you right there. You can see them, but they're presented in sort of these just small chunks. So now you're making decision at point A, decision at point B, decision at point C, making it sort of a broken up process to make it easier to make just little decisions along the way. And then finally, we look at the guidance strategy for companies that offer a large array of products. So IKEA, thousands of products, but only one way out. And what you do with the guidance strategy is you're not necessarily making a decision at every point. So let me step back. If you go to an IKEA showroom, there's only one way that you can navigate the store. That's what this is. This is the floor plan of an IKEA store. So you don't have to make a decision at every point, but they're going to tell you exactly where they want you to go and leave it up to you whether you want to make a decision there or not. But they're going to direct the flow. They're going to make it so that you're seeing the options that they want you to see. Okay. And those are sort of the strategies that I'm drawing some inspiration on. That's the thing that we do at One North of the strategy team a lot, is we draw inspiration from everywhere. And so we look at the options of reducing or focus, concealing, breaking decisions into a sort of a progressive chain, and guidance. These are all good strategies for how we make decisions easier. And so we take that inspiration, and then we'll look at what does that mean on the web. And that's why people are here. They want to hear about what does this mean for the web. So there are lots of types of decisions that you can make on the web, and I'm going to focus on a handful here. So the first decision you're going to make is the which site should I visit decision. And a lot of that plays into SEO, how you drive someone to your site. And that we covered in our last big webinar. And it was a great webinar, and I think everyone listening should definitely take a look at that webinar. You can find it on our blog. I'll touch on it just briefly, but then we're going to look more at these other decisions. So once somebody gets to your site, they're there, you have to decide, now where should I go? You have to decide how should they get there. They have to decide once they get to a piece of content, what should they focus on? And then after they've consumed the content, they have to decide, where should I go next? So those 4 decisions are really where we're going to focus. But before we get there, like I said, briefly, let's just touch on the which site should I visit decision. So before you even get to a site, a lot of decisions happen. The website is just part of a bigger business process. So if I'm doing a search, the first decision you have to make is, which site should I visit? And a lot of times this occurs here, right, in the search engine. And what we see is that most of the time people really don't even want to make a decision. They don't want to think about all these results. It might say that I have 372,000 results for the search that I did, but 53% of the time people are going to just click on that first option. And 87% of the time it's just going to be one of those first 5 results. We're not really interested in seeing all those options. We just want to make the easy decision. So, like I said, previous webinar, lots of great information about that. But let's assume somebody's gotten to your site. All right, so let's say they get to a home page or another landing page, and now they have to decide where they want to go. So for this, we're going to look at sort of a streamlined option approach to helping somebody along the way of where they want to go. So this is an American Airlines website a few years back, and you'll see that they've got sort of navigation up top. They've got an additional layer of sort of primary navigation, but then the focus is more on this main section where they have some tabs, and they even have tabs within tabs. And then even within the tab, there are lots of different ways that you can start working with this page. So this was not the site today. This is a couple years ago. They really gave you a lot of different options of how to start. But since then, American Airlines has scaled back significantly. Right? They've streamlined their options. They've figured out that there are really only a few key things that somebody wants to do when they get to the site, at least most of the time. So they've streamlined their navigation. They've streamlined their options. They've really focused on what the essential key functions are for this page. And all that other stuff is still available. You can still get to it, but it's not front and center. It's not the priority. They've prioritized based on what they know their audience is most interested in. Secondly, we'll look at sort of a personalization option for how you can help somebody get started. Right, so this is Craigslist. If I go to Craigslist.org today, this is what I get. Okay, so before I get to anything, I've got to make this decision. I've got to look through this long list of stuff. It just looks like a lot before I can even get started. Now, contrast that with Yelp, which knew that I was in Boston on the day that I took this screenshot. So before I did anything, it defaulted the site to Boston. Right? So it's already taken that complex Craigslist decision where I've got to think through, got to find my way to the right city. It's taken that decision off my plate. So it's helping me out by personalizing the site based on some information that it got for me. Just cutting out that one little decision, which is great. A lot of our audience works with law firms. Now, I'm going to take you through an example, but bear in mind, while I'm using a legal example, this applies to most professional services firms. I've got a really bad made-up example, actually, and I've got some caveats for you. So I'm not a designer. What I'm going to look at with you is not a final design, not a work product of One North. This is just for illustration purposes. None of the examples that I'm going to show you are taken directly from real law firms, though they are inspired by real law firms. And the solutions that I'm suggesting, they work for my made-up scenario, but there's no one-size-fits-all solution. If there was, I probably wouldn't have a job. And then lastly, even if your site does all of the things in my bad example, we can still be friends. So here it is, the illustrious, the eloquent lawyer and lawyer. Yeah, it's got some problems. And we're going to start with navigation, because that's where this firm, made-up firm, starts by offering you a lot of options. So if I just look at the navigation, isolate the navigation, I've got 14 different ways that I can get started. That's a lot. And we know that's a lot. We know that's wrong. But why does it feel wrong? Well, for that, we look back to some of the things we've talked about before. We look at Hicks Law. You're providing way too many options in the navigation. It's just going to slow the visitor down. We're going to look at that reduction strategy that we talked about. If we had fewer options, it would actually make it easier to find the right option and make your visitors more confident in their decision, right? Just by adding a little focus. If you're focused, you're not splitting hairs. People aren't worried if they're going to find something under publications or find it under alerts. If you just give them one option, it's going to be easier for them to find something. And then, a good idea for this is to think about this as sort of a progressive decision. Think of it like Chipotle. If we combine some of those options in that navigation, give somebody a fewer small decisions, so we don't list out every possible page on the site. It's actually, though it's going to feel like maybe you've got to take a couple extra clicks to get into something, it's actually going to be faster. It's going to be an easier process because we're not overloading somebody with too many options right out of the gate. And so for lawyer and lawyer, who also rebranded, this is what that looked like in my fake example. I took their 14 items and I condensed it to 5. And those 5 are going to capture everything in those 14, but it's going to be easier for somebody to just get started to pick one of those options. They're going to have more confidence that what they're looking for is underneath one of those primary options that I'm now showing. Another place we see something like this would be a services landing page. So the lawyer and lawyer landing page for services looks like this, or at least it did before I got my hands on it. And when we think about this, we want to think, again, back to some of those things that we talked about earlier and how we make it better. So one, I think about the paradox of choice, right? There are all these options that we're presenting, but oftentimes that's done just so people can say, well, look, we do handle this very micro area under a particular area of law. If I go back to my example I had for things like healthcare contracts versus healthcare litigation versus healthcare regulatory compliance, et cetera, all these very granular focused options. But by doing that, it actually maybe leads to some confusion about what you actually can do, because chances are your actual breadth of experience is actually broader than what it comes off as, because you've chosen to focus in on just a few key areas. So that's sort of a positioning problem, but oftentimes I think it's better just to go a little broader, make it clear that you can sort of cover the whole gamut of healthcare law rather than just some of those few specific areas. So things they could do about this, they could conceal, right? You don't have to show everything at once. Maybe use some personalization, show what you think is important to the visitor. Or, a lot of people are coming to these sites, they already have a relationship with the firm. They probably know that you have a particular capability, and they could find it through search. They could find it through another way. You don't have to just throw it all out there to them. And then lastly, again, sort of the Chipotle stance. Make it a progressive decision. Make it a fewer, smaller chunks, and let somebody go down a more directed, broken up path. Again, it's maybe another click, but there are so many things you can do from an interactive standpoint to make things reveal so quickly that it doesn't feel slower. In fact, it feels faster. Okay, so here's what I did for lawyer and lawyer. Across the top, I've got a bit of personalization. So maybe I knew that this person did a search for real estate, and that's how they got to my site. Or I know that they had looked at a page in the past that was related to real estate. So now I started off just personalizing. Maybe I'm cutting out the whole process for them entirely. They don't need to think through their different options. They're just going to say, oh, that's right, I did want real estate, and you knew that because you saw their path through the site. So personalization, make it easy, kind of like what we looked at with Yelp. The second thing you'll notice is that this is totally hypothetical, but you'll see that they've broken up their listing of services into just 4 main groups. And by doing that, it's maybe going to give me a little more confidence that what I'm looking for is under one of these 4 groups rather than trying to look through a long list. It's also going to be faster for me to pick from a list of 4 than a list of 40. And then lastly, even if I'm not showing everything, I've added a search. So now somebody can just search, use some sort of autocomplete type ahead functionality, make it easy for somebody to jump to any service that they might be interested in. Okay, so next, let's talk about how should I get there. So in the last page I looked at, I showed a handful of optional or alternate navigation paths. I showed a few different ways that somebody could get started working with the site, or with that page, with the services landing page. And sometimes that's okay to have different paths. But other times it can feel like work. Sometimes we have a whole bunch of options that are all really aimed at reaching the same goal, when a single tool that offered that, there could be a simpler way, right? And this comes up a lot when we look at some of these really complex search forms that we see on sites. And a complex form kind of goes back a ways on the web. This is an old version of Monster where I had all these different scrolling lists that I could go through. I had a bunch of different ways that I could search. But today, they're doing it in a much more user-friendly way. They are using more of the type ahead. They're not using those long lists. They've made this an easier process. But even still, there's a handful of ways you can search. Realtor.com is another instance that's sort of in the same boat. They have a handful of different ways that you can search for a home. And, they have a bunch of different drop-downs as well as different searching options. But today, they've made this a bit more friendly. They've scaled back a bit on their options. And this is good. This is better. It's more user-friendly. It looks friendlier. It doesn't look as challenging as some of those older forms did. But I think there's a better way than this to approach search, and that's to search first and filter later. And unlike Realtor.com, Zillow, in sort of the same space, searching for a home, simply offers you a single search box. And this has actually become very common in most industries, just sort of across the board. You just start with a single search box. Maybe there's some type ahead options that will help guide you to keywords to ensure that you're producing results. Then you select one of those options or you conduct a search. And then you get back your results, and then you can filter them. And this, to me, makes a lot of sense, because in the other examples, I'm filtering before I even know what results I have. And so that might mean that I'm, cutting out what might have been the best option for me, or I'm producing no results by combining different facets. Whereas, if you don't apply the filters until after you've done the search, you can do a little more in terms of ensuring that those filters that are presented to the user are always relevant to what they need, their needs, right? And you're only showing them options that apply to their listing. So where do we see this in legal? Well, it's the people search. And this is what it looks like on Lawyer and Lawyer. And I know, right? Everybody's doing it. The average AmLaw 100 website has 9 ways to search for a person. To me, that's a lot. Some of these different drop-downs I've seen have over 200 options in a drop-down. This is particularly true when we look at schools for some of the larger firms. And some usability experts actually recommend that you don't use a drop-down if you have a list that includes more than 15 options. And the reason is scrolling through a drop-down like that is a very slow process if you've got way too many options. If there aren't that many, I can live with it. But if you have a lot, it just becomes a big-time user challenge. And you have to think about this in the fact that we're living in a multi-device world. This is becoming even more of an issue when we look at things like responsive design. Some of these drop-down lists, some of the ways that those are handled on different mobile operating systems, they're pretty darn unusable. And we don't want to present all of these options if we don't have to. Specifically, if we're looking at a mobile design, where everything with mobile is, load this as fast as we can. So if we want things to load as fast as we can, that means we should be cutting back on the unnecessary. And that includes things like unnecessary search options. So, this is an example of just option overload. Simply too many options to easily decide what's the best way to search for something. And it's an example where Hicks Law applies. The search kind of feels clunky because it just takes a long time to use those filters. It takes a long time for you to make a decision of what's the right way to find somebody. And remember, here we're filtering the unseen, right? Those drop-downs are really filters, but we're showing them before there's anything to filter. That means we're wasting a lot of time presenting irrelevant options to somebody. So here's what I did for lawyer and lawyer, which I know is very stark. And what I think makes sense about this is that we would take the filters and put them on the results page. Because right now, I don't know what I'm necessarily filtering. So you could have a very nice, very smart type-ahead search. You've still got your A to Z, which is how a large number of people search because, frankly, that's just how we've used directories forever, and it's easy. So now I've got this single search box, has some suggestions that come to me as I start typing, similar to what we looked at with Zillow. And then once I start to get results, then I can do my filtering. And if that's too stark, we add in some personalization here as well, right? So here, meet our real estate team. Again, I know that I've been interested in real estate as I've clicked throughout the site. So the site's going to present to me the real estate team. So now I don't even need to make a decision, right? I don't need to go through any of the work of searching. It's already sort of been surfaced for me. Okay, so let's say that I got to some content. And now I have the where to look decision. Okay, so this is about focus. A lot of times what we'll see on a lot of sites, and we can even see this at the current version of the New York Times, is that you're kind of throwing a lot of information at people and not really directing them to what the real focus is of a page. What I mean by that is I look at this New York Times article, the real focus, what we really want somebody to think about on this page is this article that's sort of way down at the bottom, kind of doesn't really stand out. What stands out is everything else. And I bring up the New York Times as an example for this because the Times is an example of a company that's doing something about this. Right, so this is a newer version of the Times. It's a prototype, which you can access at proto.newyorktimes or nytimes.com. And what they've really done is gotten rid of all of that sort of distraction stuff, or most of the distraction stuff. As I scroll down the page, you'll see that the focus is so much more clear. It's so much more clear what they want me to do, where they want me to look. And it's not until I get to the end of the page that I then see some of those things that were at the top of the page before, some of those distractions, most emailed, some other things I might want to do next. And that makes sense for a couple of reasons. One is just the focus reason. And another is because now is the time that I'm going to take an action. I'm not going to really care about what's the most emailed or more in movies until I've looked through the content that I'm interested in. Once I've done that, then sure, show me that other stuff. But let me focus first. Let me get what I'm after, and then tell me where you want me to go. Newsweek, another company that's taken sort of the same approach. And when I first saw this, I thought it was really pretty stark. If I look at this as sort of zoomed out, this is the whole page, right? That article is really focused down this left column, and there's a lot of open space. But I like it. It really does help you just focus on the article. That's also very mobile friendly. Scales nicely in a responsive design, I should say. So what about legal? Well, here we see this a lot of times with publications. And so in my made-up example, I've got an example where the focus really isn't on the text here, right? Readability is sort of an afterthought in this design. Where I've put more focus, more emphasis, is actually on the stuff in the right column, right? Or it doesn't really look like I've thought about this page much at all. So what do we do here? Here, we don't want to distract people. We want to conceal, right? We want to conceal related content, get that out of the way until the appropriate time. So this is my redesign page for the publication, A Lawyer and Lawyer. and you'll see that there's a much more clear focus on the actual article itself. Right, I've done some things for the typography to stand out, and I've gotten rid of all the other stuff, where I've put it down at the bottom, gotten it out of the way, so that you can focus on the right content. Focus on what is really important to this page. Okay, so now, let's say I read that article, or let's say I visited someone's bio, or whatever it might be. Where should I go next, right? And some sites are handling this better than others just by providing some clear guidance, right? Kind of like IKEA. They're going to tell you where they want you to go. I call this the exit through the gift shop strategy. This is New Republic, also a very typographically driven site. You know, their articles are all very cleanly laid out. And one of the things I really like about this is the read these next options at the bottom of the page. Right? It tells you very clearly and directly where you should go next. Okay? And we also see this in sort of the idea of the one-page design. A lot of times when you're trying to tell a story on the web. When you're trying to tell a story, you can't really have people jumping from point A to point C, you know, wherever they want to go, like you would in traditional site navigation. You have to kind of focus them in and give them a path that you want them to take. So back to legal, back to lawyer and lawyer, and back to that same publication page. When I'm done reading this article, what should I do? I mean, there are a lot of options of things that I could do, but there's not really a clear next step. So this is where we want to give that clear next step. This is the bottom of that page that I looked at before. So now, when I get to the end, now I see some options. Now I see a very clear, big, bold box that says, read these next. I've got a thing about the author, some related pages, some popular articles. Those are sort of secondary, though. The big thing is read these next. The big thing is giving somebody a very clear indication of that this is where you want them to go. Okay? And now that we've gone through all of those decisions, you might be asking yourself, does it really matter? And I think it does. We have to think of this in the context of the business decision, right? No one's ever gotten fired for going to lunch at Raising Cane's. We're talking about business decisions, right? This is a greater impact decision. There's more need for research, more need for evaluation, more information to process. You're going to pay a lot of attention. You know, these are important, impactful decisions. Some of these decisions are just hard, right? And is the process of someone making the process of evaluating law firms or professional services firms, they are evaluating your website as part of that decision, right? It fits in. In our survey that we did last year, we heard that general counsel will review a firm website 1 or 2 times a month while they're credentialing firms. Right? It's right there in that decision-making process. And what they said is that they want clear, usable navigation, relevant, valuable content. Right? And that's really all that we've talked about, is how do we make things clear, a little more usable, strip out some of the excess stuff, the stuff that's not relevant, and focus really on the value stuff. So what I want you to do is try to make your website the easiest part of this business decision process. Make it so easy to work with that it actually sets the standard of ease of working with your firm. Okay? So it's very important. It's not to be taken lightly. So, key takeaways from today. When we have too many options, we slow down our decision-making process. On the web, that means your site starts to feel difficult to use. You want to make your site feel faster. You want to provide the right options, the right time, in the right place to the right person. And remember our strategies: reduction, concealment, progress, guidance. And last but not least, I can't leave you without taking my own advice, telling you where I think you ought to go next. I think reading The Paradox of Choice is great for everyone. Very insightful, and I think it'll translate a lot into your daily life, both on your website and everywhere else. I think you should review your website, look for option overload. I mentioned this earlier, but we had a great webinar about transparency in SEO not long ago that gives you a lot of good information about that, which site should I visit decision. And then I think you should read the One North blog. All the content's great, but I'll highly recommend Keeping Up with the Times, Readability's Future on the Web, that talks about focus, talks about readability, and Spring Cleaning, 6 Ways to Clean Up Your Site, another good post about reducing clutter. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you.